Hi, team. Now, I know at this point in the year, many of you have already dug into Schoology and have gotten into the assessment features and are using it actively, and that's great. But for the purposes of this session, I'm going Assessment 101, building a simple assessment from the ground up to get everybody on the same page. And moving forward, we'll start introducing more complex assessment tools like learning objectives and those kinds of things. So, for starters, I'm going to go to Add Materials and Add Assessment. Initially, it's going to ask you to go ahead and name it, get the date settled, and this is all stuff that you can change after the fact. So I'm going to name this Assessment Demo. I'm going to give it a due date of, just for the purposes of, say I had a student class that was going to take it Wednesday the 4th, and submissions enabled. Now here you can also enable until, meaning I'll turn it off on, say, Friday if it's due on Wednesday to account for absences, or maybe from and until, where I can choose to open it on Wednesday and close it on a Friday. For the purposes of this, I'm just going to say enable. For category, you can choose to assign it to any category, but generally that's going to be a project or assessment quiz grade or a mastery grade. I'm just going to give it a mastery. And your scale should already be set at WCPS if you set up your gradebook correctly. That green button will always be illuminated first. That means that it's published to students. You can turn that off so students cannot view it until you turn it on, but there's no need to do that because you control that right here with submissions. So I'm going to create this assessment. It takes you step by step through the background workings of the assessment, so you can't mess anything up if you just follow through the steps. The initial instructions, if it's a fill in the blank, if it's a multiple choice, whatever, you can put in some instructions for students there. I like these settings. It gives you a lot of flexibility with how the test operates. For example, you can give it a time limit. I will say that unless it's something you're doing as a 5 or 10 minute beginning of class thing, don't give it a time limit because lunch will inevitably cross over that class and mess that up. I always choose to randomly order the questions. It doesn't matter. That's just my preference. And I do like to show the possible points of each question unless I have some that are heavily weighted more than others. In the assessment toolbar, I like these new tools that Schoology has just rolled out, where kind of like what they're doing with the online state assessments, you can have students flag questions for review and eliminate answer choices. Those are just good test taking skills that students need to practice anyway. If it's a math test, they can have a basic or scientific calculator, and students can also have the option of using a ruler during the assessment. And there's a protractor option as well. In the student settings, you can allow students to view results, or you can allow them to view it with correct answers. And if this is a formative assessment where you will be giving those questions again, I would not allow them to see the correct answer. I would just choose yes so they can see what they got right. And then for number of attempts a student can submit, usually you want to select 2 for that if you're allowing them retakes. Otherwise, if there's a problem, they can always go back in and re-attempt it. But I'll say 1 for this time. I'm going to save those settings. And this is something you can go back and change after you've created the assessment. Going to questions. There are a lot of options over here to the left. I'm not going to delve into all of them. I'm going to show you how to do a couple of simple question types and then turn you loose to explore. You're not going to break anything. Schoology has recently added several new options here that are pretty exciting for use with math especially and for language arts, and we'll get into those at a more advanced session. So I'm going to make a multiple choice question. It'll populate over here, and I'll type my question as a start. And then it is a pretty simple text box here. There are some options, and you can drop in images and that kind of thing. I've done that before, where students have to match an image to a word, vocabulary word, or whatever. Graphs and charts, it works pretty well. In the options here, it also has a pretty simple word processor that you can use. So I'm just going to go in and put in some answer choices. And you can always add more options to that. The correct answer setup. If I know that I want my correct answer to be 4, shuffle options, and if it's multiple responses, then you can select 2 and 4. Of course, that's not the right answer though, so we're just going to say 1. And I always do prefer to shuffle options unless this is something you know is going to be done as a read aloud. Then you'd want the questions to be in the same order and not to shuffle the options. Layout, you can choose standard. This will change up here if you do block, for example, or radio buttons, which I don't see the need for. I like the standard view just fine, unless it's something that you're worried about transferring on to a Scantron. For some reason, if it's a read aloud, you might go with the block A, B, C, D. And then a tool that I'm not going to dig too much into yet, but if you already know how to do it, add that learning objective, and that will link it to a standard. Like I'm just going to tag this social studies standard, and what that will do is then track that throughout all the questions that you tag that standard to. I'm going to save this. And now I've got my first multiple choice question. Go ahead and try true, false, and matching and ordering. These are older Schoology features, and they all work fairly well. I would shy away from the fill-in-the-blank text option. It doesn't tend to work as well, but the fill-in-the-blank drop-down does. So play with it and let me know if you have questions. Be sure to check out the next post for an assignment that is attached to this skill.